So when I first thought about doing this podcast, excuse me, not podcast, this is not a podcast, this Facebook Live, I thought, yeah, this is about finding better. And I was going to go into a whole bunch of stuff about that. And then, sometimes what happens is I start typing and I'm like, no, this is actually changing your thought patterns. And it's really moving yourself away from limiting and predominant negative attitudes like bad things always happen to me. How come I never get my way? Why do I always get the shit end of the stick? How come life is so miserable? The world is in a nice place. Focusing, and believe me, let me just get this clear. I can focus on a million things every day that's fucked up and wrong in the world. Okay? We could have a whole hour long one of these things about that. However, I still believe in the goodness of humanity and the goodness of human kindness. And every day, even without me seeking it, so to speak, I see that goodness in people. Sometimes it's after watching 10 fucking idiots, but I always end up seeing the goodness of people. And I happen to be surrounded by really good people. I have a really good man. I have really good friends. I have, a lot of really healthy, good relationships. Now, however, let's go back to the limiting belief thing about how you always get the shit end of the stick. I don't think people really, really realize these little actions that they take that continue to allow them to get the shit end of the stick. And I'll give you a specific and very little example. Whilst also, let me just interject this piece, while everybody has all these sayings pasted all over the place about having boundaries and positive affirmation and I love myself and I am great, here's what happens. So I'm taking drum lessons and I want to rent a studio because I can't have a set at home in my apartment. So I go to this one place, I call the guy, he's out of town, I make an arrangement to meet him to actually use the studio. I text him when I get there, he's not there. He says, I'll be there in 2 minutes. Shows up 15 minutes later. He didn't really understand that I wanted to use the room. He gave me rates. They were a little on the expensive side. And then, within 2 minutes of our interaction, he's spouting politics. And I'm like, what the fuck? Listen, there's two things, honestly, I really don't want to talk about if I don't know you. And even then it's iffy. And one is politics and specifically a former politician. And the other one is COVID. Okay. So just to make that clear. Now, this guy starts spouting out about actually all of that I just mentioned. So I'm like, so I leave, I walk out and I'm thinking and in the midst of that, it's business is rough, money's not coming, life is difficult. So I walk out and in my head and in my heart with total clarity is I don't want to interact with this guy. I don't want to give him my money. I don't want to rent his studio, and it's not he's a bad person or whatever. There's a million people like that running around, stressed out, talking about stuff, getting caught up. No big deal. But how much do I want to buy in and pay someone who I'm going to have to see ongoing who's like that? Not really at all. But then there's this little voice that's you should just help him out and, give him the money and so what's the big deal? He needs it and la, 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 la. And I'm that voice is compassionate, it's loving, it's good, but sometimes it's stupid, okay? Because I'm sitting there and I'm ready to take my needs or what I know to be real and true because I need to like somebody I'm doing business with. It's just that simple. If I'm giving you my money, I like you. And if I don't like you, you're giving me a lot of money. You're giving me a lot of money if I'm interacting with you in business, right? Now, I kind of went through the mental masturbation of whether or not I'm going to rent with this guy and do this and I go back to my drum instructor. I tell her what happened. She goes, you should call this other guy. I call this other guy. I talk to him on the phone. He's quite pleasant. He makes time for me to come over. He's about half as expensive as the other guy. I go over there. There's no problem. I give him my money and I'm going to go back. And I had a really good experience and I practiced. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that here's what happens with a lot of people. They have the kind of interaction I had with the first guy and they start making, they do that mental masturbation and excuse making and then they sign up for the shit. Literally sign a lease on, I'm going to have a shitty relationship, sign on the dotted line. And then a month or 2 months later, when the person ends up really being the prick that you already knew he or she was, and by the way, a female can be a prick, in the first interaction, you're I can't believe that this, you want to go into this whole thing about complaining about somebody that you decided to get into bed with. You see what I'm saying? Now, here's the tricky part. It's like that part of you that's just like, oh, the world always gives me the shit end of the stick. Is like you make these decisions, we all make decisions that like reaffirm those limiting beliefs like over and over and over. And then want to play victim because we don't really have the awareness of how we're playing a part to keep buying into that attracting the shit end of the stick. Okay? But here's what I'm going to say. In my little example, you have to wait. You cannot allow desperation, financial insecurity, negativity, caretaking somebody else, trying to like be compassionate for somebody whilst giving up your own needs. You can't allow that to permeate important decisions. Now, you may think my drum lessons is not an important decision. It's a very important decision because a couple hours a week, I'm going to give someone my money and have to interact with them. And I don't want to get resentments when every time I see them, they're a prick. Okay? So try that out. Next time you feel like sense in your gut, like, oh, I don't really want to interact with this person. Don't. Have a good weekend. Thanks for joining me.